Welcome to episode 122 of the How Did It Happen podcast, hosted by Mike Malatesta. In this episode, Mike welcomes Dr. Pat Boulogne, a lifestyle medicine expert at Health Team Network. She's also the author of Why Are You Sick, Fat, and Tired?, an international best-selling book and available on Amazon. Dr. Pat helps clients reverse the aging process and reclaim their health.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the show. As you heard in the introduction, I have Dr. Pat with me today, and I'm really excited because I've done some research on Dr. Pat and listened to her on a few other podcasts, and she knows about everything when it comes to your health and welfare, and it's a big thing with me, so I'm really into that, and I'm really looking forward to exploring it. I will say, well, first of all, Dr. Pat, thank you for being on the show today.
Super. I'm so happy to be here and share some time with you guys. It'll be fun.
And before we get into it, I just want to let everybody know that Dr. Pat and I connected on LinkedIn. So she sent me a LinkedIn connection. We started to having a dialogue, and we ended up on the podcast. So that's a great way for people to interact with me. If you want to interact with me, just shoot me a note or an invitation on LinkedIn, and I'd love to have a dialogue with anybody who's got a great story that they want to share, like today with Dr. Pat. So with that said, Dr. Pat, I start every show the same way, and it's with a simple question. How did it happen for you?
Well, in 1954, I was born. When I was a kid, I came out of the chute, challenging. I'm a challenger. So if something doesn't sound right or something doesn't have congruency for me, even as a small kid, I always asked questions. I was like the student in the back of the room with their hand up all the time going, could you explain to me exactly how that works? I do the same, I've always done the same thing in different, areas of my life, things that I've studied. And I've always been really prone and lucky to, in science. Science has always been very easy for me. And I was very fortunate growing up I'm the last out of 5 siblings. And when I was growing up, my father always told me that I could do anything, and I was smart, and I could do anything that I wanted to do. So when I played games, I only had boys to play with till I was about maybe 13, 14. So I grew up as a tomboy. I could play better football, touch football,
okay.
And baseball. And I did all those things like that, ride bikes and that type of thing. But I didn't have any girlfriends until I was about 13 years old that lived around my house. And so one thing that I noticed about, that I experimented as a child, I can remember I thought if you could acclimate to your environment, this is in grown-up terms, if you acclimate to your environment, then you would survive better. So I lived in Michigan, and we used to have snowstorms that, as a small kid, would come above my knees. So that was at least a foot or more, and I was always freezing. So I did things that, if I thought that I was warm, then I would be warm, and I thought that was an interesting, I remember these little things like that when I was growing up. So it always made me interested in science. And when I was 9 years old, I submitted a science project. And I came in second place in the state of Michigan for that then. And my father asked me, he wanted me to be an electrical engineer. And he would tell me about he was an electrical engineer. He went to Michigan Institute of Technology, and he had a very, very high grade point. And he always said to me that, he always talked about rhyme and reason, being able to take things apart and put them back together, and not have any extra pieces. Like we did that with my bicycle a lot. And so, if I look at where my foundation comes and the reason why I'm so interested in science, it has to come from my influence from my father. So when I was graduating from high school, this is a kind of fun story, but graduated from high school, my father asked me what college I wanted to go to. And I told him I didn't want to go to college. And so he said, are you sure? And I said, I'm sure. So he asked me if I wanted to go into downtown Detroit, because we lived in the suburbs. And we drove in on I-75 and got off at 12th Street where the riots basically started. And my father found some street and he pulled the car over and he told me to get out. And I went, what would I want to get out here for? It's just dangerous here. He goes, well, if you don't go to college, this is probably where you're going to live. I mean,
So
there
you
wasn't,
didn't know where you were going
I
at
had
the
no
time.
idea where I
Okay, you're
was
just out
going.
for a ride.
I was just out for a ride. We're going to
Okay.
go out to lunch someplace in Detroit, you know, because there's a fun area called Greek Town. And I was already thinking in my head what I was going to order, you know, that kind of thing. And he pulls off on the street, and it was where the riots were. That some of the store fronts and houses there still had boardings up from 1967 when the riots happened. And that was in 1972. And so, or the summer of like, you know, getting towards 72. And so he said, you know, you better make some decisions here. And I said, I'll go to the college of your choice. That's what my answer was. And, you know, and that just put things in perspective truly very quickly. And we went out and had such a nice lunch. And when we came back, he announced to his wife that she's going to go to college. And she said, oh, what changed your mind? I said, oh, nothing special. You know, as I said, my dad talks sense into me. Just didn't want to get involved in a bigger conversation about that. So I went and I started taking, you know, classes that interests me, and started more science classes. And I had an instrumental friend who came to visit me after I graduated, and I was starting a master's and an MBA, and I hated it. And so a friend of mine was going to chiropractic school, and he said, this is what you should do, you know. And I'm such a resistant child. Like when someone tells me this is what you should do, I want to go the opposite direction.
Okay, yep.
And so we're having this conversation, and he said, you have all the prerequisites, you have all pre-med, you have all these classes, you know, you might have to take one course in order for you to go to chiropractic school. And I didn't go. You know, I decided, I'm not doing that. I'm not interested in doing that. And then I hurt myself because I was waiting on tables at the time when I was in my MBA program. And I had to go to a chiropractor to get fixed. And so when I went in there, I was looking at how this guy did what he did. And I always think that everything happens for a reason. And I said, if this guy can do this, because I didn't like him, I said, I can do it. And so I went to school, and the rest is history. And I had it was such a really interesting, how did I fall into that? You know, when I graduated from school, I had a couple really good mentors in chiropractic that I said, like, okay, so I have all this information, what do I do with it? You know, like, and how do I apply that? And then my practice was on Cape Cod at the time. And I bought a practice that was underserved. And 3 months later, we were really super busy. We had more people. We had to create times and readjust our times in order to accommodate the load that we were taking on. And we, you know, we were very careful in creating a good name, you know, results count, you know, and we did a lot of, you know, we tested, we didn't kind of guess, you know, when we were dealing with somebody. If there was a question mark, someone wasn't, you know, progressing the way we wanted them to do, then we would send out, like, let's do this test. Let's find out if something else is going on that's lurking below the surface. And, you know, and it just kept on mushrooming. I had it for 10 years. In the interim, I got divorced, bought my husband out. He was a chiropractor also. And then I sold the practice about 10, 11 years later after we started it. And I moved up to Boston from Cape Cod. And then I went to acupuncture school.
Then you went to, okay. So before we get to acupuncture school, let me ask you a couple questions about what you just shared with us.
Sure.
What was the science project?
Oh, the science project was the science project was an acid-base indicators. So it was a pH type of thing. So I was looking at pH and what things were, like foods were more acid and more base. So my father worked at Allied Chemicals at the time, and I can remember calling him up and saying, I need some phenolphthalein. And he said, you need what? And I said, phenolphthalein. He goes, what are you doing? I said, I'm doing this acid-base indicator experiment, and I've got my Vlasic pickle jars, you know, that I stripped the labels off of, you know, and I relabeled them. But I was showing what, like, if something's acid and when you are testing it, it's a certain color. And if it's a basic, it's a certain color. And then there was other spectrums on that of pHs that, you know, and then you had the middle jar that was neutral. And so that's like where our water should be, but our drinking water is at neutral, but it's a lot of water is not at neutral, but it's more acid than it is in that realm of 7.0. So that's what my project was. And my teacher thought it was a good enough project that he submitted without my knowledge to the state for the state competition.
So you're in these jars, you had different liquids, food liquids or so, and you were showing, or were they?
It was even more basic than that. It was just, it was just a, I can't remember the exact substance in each one. There was water, which was supposed to be 7. And then you had one of the treatments in it, if there was acid in it, it would be the phenolphthalein. And then the other one was a blue color that was pink. And the blue color one, I can't remember what was the substance that was the substrate that was in there that, would tell it that it was more basic.
Okay.
And but the interesting thing about phenolphthalein is they use it as a preservative in beer.
There's a lot of that stuff out there, right?
There is a lot of that
titanium dioxide and other things that are in products, and you're like, that's okay. So I've heard you talk about on another show, as I was doing my research, I heard you talk about, and you just mentioned it here, water at neutral pH, which is 7. And it's so I just thought I'd ask you this, because there's a lot of waters on the market that are acidic waters, like black water, for example, and some others are slightly acidic. And then I'm drinking this water now that's alkaline. It's 8.8 pH, and there's sort of these different schools of thought and or marketing about what's the optimal water for you to be drinking. So as long as we were talking pH, I thought I'd ask you about that, because I've heard you talk about it before.
Well, technically, water should be 7 to 7.2 for drinking purposes. Your 8.8 pH water is making you more alkaline. And the idea behind being more alkaline is that it protects you from exposure to other diseases, because the more alkaline your body is, the less likelihood you will express things like cancer, diabetes, and things like that. And so, but the thing about alkaline water is, like, when you're looking at your stomach purposely has a certain amount of acid. It's usually like around 2.5, something like that. The pH of your stomach. So when you eat things, you're supposed to have them be able to break down the foods that you eat,
Sure.
And so you have to have the acid for that. Like, if you ever looked at, food combining charts, that's like acid food, basic food, and that anti-inflammatory diet is what they call it now. And so if you can balance out those foods on a food combining chart, then you're optimizing the chemistry of the foods that you're eating better for your system. And so I always give a food combining chart for food for thought to my clients, so that they can take a look at that and say, hey, well, the reason why steak and potatoes never went together before is because you used to have this 16 ounce, 20 ounce steak, and you would have this potato that was huge. And if you look at portion size for protein, fats, and carbohydrates, the protein, 7 grams is a unit of protein for your body, and 9 grams of carbohydrates, which is raw food, is 1 cup raw or half a cup cooked. And then fats is 1.5 grams. So when you put that protein, the fat, the carbohydrate, it makes kind of like a perfect protein, and your body utilizes it better. So you have much more anti-inflammation in your body. So everybody needs a certain amount of protein to maintain muscle mass. And that's really important, because sometimes when you grow older and you get less active, you'll have muscle wasting because of less activity, and our strength. So if you know if you know what the protein requirement is for your body, you can adjust the carbohydrates and fats to the rest of to what your daily need is.
Okay, got it. And then you mentioned when you went to the chiropractor the first time that sounds like it was a he, and it sounds like maybe he helped you, but you said, I didn't like him. And I'm curious what happened there where you were where it was enough where you got a positive out of it because you wanted to maybe explore it further, but you didn't, but you also sort of combined it with maybe a negative.
Well, what happened is that when I was sitting there, the first thing before he even touched me is he wanted to take x-rays on me, full spine x-rays. And my problem was my neck and my shoulder. And I said, why do you have, and I asked him questions about it. So I ended up not having care by him, and I ended up leaving.
Okay.
And so, and it's just like, I wasn't buying into like, you've got to take x-rays of my whole spine. I now know why he wanted to do that, but then he wasn't very communicative about the reasoning why to do that. And I thought, if he can do this, I can do it better.
Okay.
And that's what happened exactly with that situation.
Okay. And you mentioned moving to, or having your practice in Cape Cod. You mentioned growing up in Michigan. How did you make the transition there? And what was it like to actually get started with your company or your practice in Cape Cod? Well,
when I went to Cape Cod, there wasn't a lot of people there, and people told me, it's only a summer area. And so, and I found a practice that was for sale, and I told my husband about it. He was still in Michigan, finishing up a commitment for working in a chiropractic office there. And I came to Massachusetts and in Boston and worked for a chiropractor in Cambridge, right near MIT and Harvard. And then when he came out and joined me, we were looking at this particular practice for sale, and I was working, so I let him do that part of the negotiation, and we decided to go with it because we had a choice of either going to the mountains or being on Cape Cod, which you had, the Atlantic Ocean and Martha's Vineyard and all this really wonderful, it was beautiful. There's hardly any people there. And you didn't need a GPS to get around and for the summertime. And you were glad you didn't have one then, because then all the tourists, they would know all the back roads. But it was a really great place. And it was very, pretty much welcoming. And it was easy to meet people there. So there was like one health food store, but there was people who I met like for like in the Rotary and the Lions Club. And so I did most of the outside talking for the practice and set those up. And my husband always said to me, like, he said, no one came in from that Rotary thing. I said, well, that's because Dr. Lajava, who was a doctor on Cape Cod, he's big there, so they don't want to offend him. But what would happen, though, is every time I would go out and give a talk, our statistics, we had people coming. People were told by somebody else, like, hey, I go, how did you hear about us? And they said, oh, someone told me they were at the Rotary Club and they said that you were a new chiropractor and we should, check you out. So it was very, very much word of mouth. And then, there was like some fun groups to join because people were starting to get into meditation. I remember seeing Deepak Chopra for like $5 at Cape Cod Community College before he started out. And he was horrible. What happened with him, and it was really great, is that somebody heard him and saw the potential. And then they approached him about doing something bigger and having bigger impact. So I always, it's just like on note from, seeing him, that was incredibly inspiring. That aspect of that, and other people who I've seen and have crossed paths with, on Cape Cod, when people are like, oh, so-and-so is down there. I said, oh yeah, I remember seeing Tony Robbins. Tony Robbins talked to my doctor group up in Andover, Massachusetts, the business group that I belong to, when he was just starting out and he was doing his fire walks.
Yeah, sure.
And so that was, and someone asked me, do you know who Tony Robbins is? I said, absolutely not. But Tony Robbins is like, everyone knows who Tony Robbins is. Very few people don't, right? But he started doing his fire walks and, that NLP stuff with, people who could make an impact with that, which were physicians, alternative physician, chiropractor, acupuncturist, things like that, massage therapists, so that was kind of cool. And that's when spas started to come on the scene, and that type of stuff. So it was interesting. It was an interesting time to have cross paths with some people who are phenomenally great now.
Yeah, I suppose. I mean, you can't really think of two bigger names that you could have just sort of run across on Cape Cod when they were nobodies or just trying to become somebody than Deepak
Yeah.
Chopra or Tony Robbins.
Right. It's $5 to see Deepak Chopra. I doubt you would ever pay that again, And my girlfriend paid in Spain a couple of years ago to see Tony Robbins. She paid something like $5,000 for his seminar. I just went, and I saw him for free, and I learned how to bend spoons and forks and gave thought to walking on fire.
You didn't do it.
I didn't do it.
I don't think I would do it either.
No, it's just like, I like, for some reason, skydiving doesn't do it for me either. It's just
me neither. I don't want to jump out of a plane.
Yeah, that doesn't appeal to me, or bungee jumping. It doesn't. I mean, the force on your spine on the bungee jump, you got to have a really good spine and have it put together very well and be really fit. To me, I wouldn't bungee jump unless I knew that I knew. I was solid.
It's funny you mentioned that because a few years ago, maybe more than a few years ago now, but I was at a state fair and I got on this ride with my niece that it's basically the opposite of a bungee jump. So it actually pulls, the the giant rubber band down and then it lets you go and you go up. And I was not prepared for what happens at the top of when you go up. My neck, moved in a way that I guess, G-forces are going to do. And that took me a long time to get over that. So I see what you mean about bungee jumping. I don't
Mike,
know.
you needed me.
I know. I definitely did.
It
hurt. I mean, it hurt for a long time. Not like debilitatingly, but you could feel it. I could feel it for a really long time.
Yeah.
You mentioned the Rotary clubs and sort of getting out there in front of people. Has speaking in front of people been something that's come naturally to you, Dr. Pat, or is that something you've had to work on?
I will tell you, the first time I gave a semi-thesis, a half thesis is what they called it in chiropractic school. I was giving this presentation and I lost my space. And I just went, wow. So I just closed my books and I opened them again and I started all over. And that was the only thing I think of, but I was sweating.
Yeah.
And then when I graduated, my husband was still in school. So I was an assistant. I was an instructor at the chiropractic college and I was teaching. I was into a class that had like 300 people standing in front of me. And I wore a white blouse that first day because I was sweating. And then after that, I was relatively fine. It's just people always say, like I said, I'm really shy. People are like, I don't think so. As I don't have that, not anymore. I mean, but at one point in time, because I was scared that I wasn't prepared enough. If someone asked me a question, I wanted to be able to follow my sheets of paper, my flow sheets, that I had for cheat sheets. Everyone else had 3x5 or 4x6 cards. I had sheets of paper. So it ended up going well, and the teaching part ended up going well. And I actually learned the subject better than when I took the same course when I was in school. And it was Geriatric Diagnosis. And I thought it was a very important class in retrospect, because, if you look at the baby boomers, I'm at the end of the baby boomers, and so it encompassed all my friends and older people. So it gave me a better perspective on things that someone who's in geriatrics goes through, for their type of healthcare.
Okay. And I, maybe 5 or 6 episodes ago, I had a fellow named Ta Whitty on my show, and Ta, for a lot of his career, had been an ER nurse, so like a triage nurse in an ER room. And when I was listening to you, as I was researching for this, I thought you had some very unique experiences and perspective on chiropractic, and how here I'll connect the two together. As a triage nurse, Ta was talking about how he could, just by being close to someone, what their breath smelled like, or what their sweat smelled like, or what they, he was observing all these things in a way that was way higher than I think the average person does, and he could make assessments as to what was going on with that person. And I heard you talking about something similar with chiropractic. It wasn't, and I wanted to have you share that with us, because I know for me, I probably have like a caveman mentality when it comes to chiropractors. I think chiropractor is just there to sort of adjust your spine and, you're out the door and come back and, that kind of thing. But I don't think that's what it is. I certainly don't think from listening to you that that's how you think about it. So tell me about that.
Well, let's first get straight on one thing.
Okay.
The first thing is that you've got to understand why people get sick in the first place. So, and then I'll bring it back to the chiropractic part of it.
Okay.
And so, there's traumas, toxins, and thoughts. So the trauma portion of it is inflammation in the body. So inflammation can be in your organs, it can be in the fat tissues around your organs, and it can be, also in your spine. The first time, 9 out of 10 people in the birthing process, through a normal birthing process or even cesarean, there's damage somewhat to the cervical area of the neck, which sets up the first part of inflammation. So a lot of times, by the time I used to take x-rays and I would look at someone's x-rays, their neck, which is supposed to have a curve in it, was straight. And you started seeing bony changes and disc changes even at an early age of like 22 or 25. And you shouldn't have to see those until like 40 or something like that. And so, that's the first part. Then you have toxins. It's the second reason. And so the reason for that, and the reason why you go to a chiropractor, back on the trauma part of it, is so that you get your biomechanics straightened and you start at a very young age so that your, structure is function. So if you don't have good structure, as your spine houses the vertebra in the back, houses your nervous system that goes out into every organ tissue in your body. So you want to make sure all those things are moving the way that they're supposed to, including your, extremity, like ankles, feet, and things like that, because you have to look at what's weight bearing and what's not weight bearing. Okay. And then, if you can look at someone's posture, and as soon as someone throws their head forward, you're taking an 11-pound, 10-pound object, and you're adding a lot of pounds per square inch as each 5 degrees progresses forward. So you can see how people, when they start to lose their posture or they hurt themselves, and they create a new normal. So then you have like toxins. So toxins are things like the air that you breathe, the water you drink, the the food that you eat, things that you use in your house. You got to read labels. You got to know what those are. And you have to know that a lot of them are carcinogenic. A lot of those have, when you're drinking water out of plastic, and especially from extreme heat or too cold, those plastics are ingested in your body and they stay there. So they interfere with how your hormones work. And when they interfere with how those hormones work, then you have interference with how estrogen and testosterone work. So people don't understand why, like, oh, why am I tired, or why am I sleepy all the time? And how do I get this autoimmune situation to begin with? And then some of those autoimmune situations actually go back to bad vaccines that were released. And I don't want to get into that right now, but it's a huge story with that. And then you have thoughts. So when, and women are more prone to this anyway, because we worry about everything. We worry about whether or not, Mike, you had enough sleep last night, and did you eat all your dinner? Do you want anything else? It's just like you're 10 minutes late, coming from home. The first thing you're happening for women, it's like, okay, I wonder where he's at, and as opposed to just, and you can't, a lot of women can't get a handle on that. So that bonding hormone, that happens when, like, kids are born, if women remembered how painful it was and that hormone didn't go up, we would never have any kids. We wouldn't have a population problem, but because of that, they're always like, women always do for everybody else except themselves. They put themselves last all the time. My husband needs this more than I do. I can't even tell you how many times in my career I've ever heard women say that, and I just want to shake them, and it's because, like, if you can't take care of yourself, you can't take care of somebody else, so those thoughts like worry, stress, it's just like whatever the media tells you, you always have to go like, well, who wins? What's the purpose of that information that I'm hearing? And, because a lot of people, when they add that extra stress on, it makes them sicker. And there's a lot of people who are sick and don't know it. So, for instance, like in COVID, you had people that go, well, he was so healthy and he just died, and it's like, well, he wasn't that healthy because what was going on below the surface was ramping up. And a lot of men don't pay attention to that ramping up stuff until after the age of 40 to 50. So you ask a guy, how are you feeling? Unless they're puking up in a toilet, they don't say they're sick or they don't feel good. You know, it's just like very rarely do you have that conversation with people like that.
Yeah.
So
and even people looking at them don't, they go, oh, that's just what he or she looks like. Unless there's some really, obvious sign that you're having trauma, you're limping or you're
right.
Right. Or,
well, it's just like
when
I had a ski accident, years ago, and I was in rehab, and I told somebody that, I wasn't working, I was on disability. I go, you don't look like you should be on disability. It has nothing to do with looks. It has to do with function, and if structure is function, that's where chiropractic comes in, because the pillars of health are proper diet or nutrition, proper exercise, proper sleep, positive mental attitude and mindset. And also then you have structure, function, biomechanics of the body. And that's why you go to with a chiropractor, is to really keep the structure function at the most optimum level that you possibly can. And then you got to work on the nutrition component, then you work on the other parts of the components. So that's why I wrote my book that I told you about, our weakest link is, and then you can address what's important, where you can put your time, energy, and money, and you're not spinning wheels someplace else because you read it in the book, like for melatonin, for instance, which changes the chemistry of your body. You don't want to do that. You really want to have like, what is it that I really, really need to do? And it's not dependent upon what your diagnosis is, because one of those mentors I talked to you about in chiropractic, well, he always said, what you got isn't necessarily what you got, so you've got to say, like, here's what I'm working with. And when you're making a mind map, you're going, okay, so what else could be going on? So that differential diagnosis part of it is huge. So that's why I always say I like to test. I don't want to guess about anybody. I need something to work with, and I need good information to work with to carry someone forward. So when I adjust in a very particular way, like how I adjust. And I say structure is function, because I look at how the body is moving per each segment in each side of the body as I examine from feet going up to the head. So, because gravity goes down, it doesn't go up, so unless there's a trauma. And so I look at like, where's the glitch? Let's fix that glitch. Come back. Did that do anything? And I have people sometimes going, oh my God, like, how come my chiropractor, because I do a lot of fill-in work, how come my chiropractor doesn't do that? I said, I don't know. It's my technique. So, but it's really very satisfying to see people make that progress and make it in, really quality confined time. It's really great to see that.
Well, I love how you combined trauma, toxins, and thoughts, especially thoughts, because you don't really hear a lot of doctors talk about thoughts. In fact, I'm sort of reminded. I have a friend who's a GI doctor, and he's an excellent GI doctor, but he's sort of narrow on what a GI doctor does. A GI doctor does. I can't remember what they call the throat procedure, but that and colonoscopies and and handles cancers and really reacts to what they observe there. But outside of that, there's not really a discussion about, let's talk about toxins in your body, and let's talk about let's talk about thoughts. So how did you come to put all those things together?
Oh, I don't know. It's a combination of things. Like I do an analysis that's called AK, so in kinesiology. So when I'm going to acupuncture somebody, because I'm an acupuncture physician also, I always clear out if there's an emotional component. And in Chinese medicine, there's 5 areas or 5 meridians that really relate to emotions, like anger and resentment and worry and overthinking and joy, sadness, those kind of things, grief, and paralyzed will. It's just like, so if I know where someone's emotionally stuck, and if I can address that emotional component first, when I'm working on someone specifically, even on the telephone. Having this conversation sometimes is very releasing for somebody to get past that. And, you can know where to start. And then you can go in, because one of my instructors, the same guy who said, what you got isn't what you got, he said, you got to take care of the emotional component first before you do the structure, or the structure will keep on coming back. A lot of people who have like chronic fatigue, and people who are super sensitive to perfumes and smells and things like that, they're not good detoxifiers, because if they were, they wouldn't have that problem. And people, when they're talking about like, well, what can I do about that? You got to fix the gut if you want to change your life. You got to fix that part of your health to do your life. You have to look at like, what things are, what thing am I sensitive to? And you have to look at whether or not you're a candidate to be in a detox program to begin with. And I'm not talking about drug detox. I'm talking about detoxification, where you're getting rid of toxins and poisons out of your system and heavy metals. And, so what you got to do is you got to tonify the function of the liver, because the liver doesn't do detox. You don't detox the liver. The liver does the function of detox. So it's supposed to take those toxins after they go into your blood system, and it's supposed to take them and put them either, if they're small enough, they go to the kidneys, to the bladder to be peed out. And if there's a bigger molecule, they go into your intestinal tract to be handled. And so you can poop them out and have a bowel movement. And that's how you're supposed to do that. And if you're eating the right foods that are right for you, then what happens is that, those those toxins become glue with that type of food molecule, and it takes it out of the body. And it's a very simplistic form.
Okay.
So,
nice visual.
and because we have such toxins in our system, and around us, in our house, in our environments, I recommend people to do a simple detoxification process where they're working on getting rid of heavy metals. If anyone ever grew up near a steel mill, or some chemical company of some sort, of, plastics or whatever, it'd be important to, like always make sure that your body has all the things that it needs. It's like, you don't drive a car without changing the oil or changing the tires or working with the alignment. If you do, your car ages really quick, and so does your body. There's people who are 40 who look older than I do, and I'm a good 20 years older than them, so it's like you have to take a look at like what's the big picture. And then you have to look at like in a layout sheet, old-fashioned layout sheets. When I did that for my office, I could always pick places where it didn't look right to me. I don't know why, but it's like, oh, here or over here. I do the same thing when I'm looking at someone's health snapshot and what's happening with all their organ systems that are supposed to be working like a Swiss watch. But when one slows down, it affects another part of your system. So like in 1984, they told people to take aspirin for the brain, not the brain, for the heart. And the aspirin was really good for the heart, but it was really bad for blood vessels. And at that same time, you started seeing, because at that time, there was no strokes or those type of cerebral accidents were not even on the top 10 of reason why people died in the United States. But they did go up after they started telling people to take aspirin.
And is that because it was good for the heart, but it weakened the arteries?
Yes.
Okay.
People would have blowouts. It's good. The heart loved it. It's good for muscle, because the heart is a muscle.
Yeah.
But it's not good for the blood vessel. So if you have, and it's just like, you're like, where is that really fine-tuned balance? Like, where's that weakest link in my system? Because if you have a weak link and you don't know where it's at, and you're trying to sort that out, then you might be doing, putting a Band-Aid on something as opposed to fixing the root problem.
Okay.
And so if you can get to the root problem, then you can get, what I do is I make sense of stuff like that, and I make it, more, I can find a better way that's simpler. And simpler doesn't mean that it's easy, but it's achievable. And that you have, it's faster, and you have, really tangible results. So it's, for me, that part of it, like when I look at stuff like that, I'm going, can't you see that? It's easy for me to see that. And it's easy for me to like steer people to like, hey, or if I'm helping someone advocate with them. It's like when you go to your doctor, these are questions that you definitively need to ask. And if he doesn't answer them, just start off from the bat. I need the answers for these questions, and I expect you to answer these questions in the time that we have together. Because there's, medical doctors are so short on time, they don't really have the time to like really divulge and just like, how can I tell you my story? And they don't always do a really good systems review, which is what my book is really about. It's intensive review for your body so that you know, in those systems, organ systems in your body, so you know what's going on and why is this high and this high over here. And, it's just like, and how, because you could have a low liver score on that chart. But then if you look at the metabolic questionnaire that I give people, you could have a high score, which would say they're a candidate for it, which means there's something going on below the surface. So it's just like, let's go get it, get rid of it.
So I want to dig in a little deeper here so you can help make something simple, which is simpler for me, which is your superpower, right? So on the toxin side, I don't think, like I feel like I'm pretty in tune with my body and what's going on. But when you say a detox, my mind goes to what you see, like the movie stars are doing, right? They do a fast and a enema thing or whatever. That's what comes into my brain. And then I was thinking about, in conjunction with what you can't see, like a few years ago, my wife and I had a scan for visceral fat, which I hadn't heard of before a few years ago. And probably most people don't know what visceral fat is. But when you were talking about, the holding on to toxins inside of your body, it feels like visceral fat sort of provides an environment inside of you where things can sort of hang out and metastasize and that kind of thing. So could you talk more about and make more simplify the whole toxin? Yeah, thank you.
I can. So what you need to know when you eat something and it gets absorbed. So if you have inflammation in the intestinal tract, then foods go out to the blood quicker. And so they go to the liver, and the liver tries to process them. And the idea, what happens when you're younger, your recovery and restoration is a lot quicker. When you get older, it starts to lag. So like, for instance, if you go out and have a couple glasses of wine and you've got a headache the next day, you're probably not detoxifying. Your liver's not doing that process of detoxification, which there's layers of it. There's like 3 or 4 layers of detoxification that have to happen to get for it to work properly. So when it can't do that and it gets overwhelmed, and it's already done this thing twice, it's already gone from the stomach, you ate, it goes into the blood, it goes to the liver, and the liver pushes those toxins. They try to put it someplace. It will store them in blood, brain, bone, and fat. So the visceral fat is fat that cushions and keeps moist all your internal organs. And the test that you had was either a bioimpedance or a body composition test, which tells you what your cells look like inside. So when people have cells that are dehydrated and they have more liquids on the outside, which is like that puffiness kind of thing that you see, then what you're seeing is that that's more inflammation. Okay. So when you're looking at, someone who's skinny, they can have a high visceral fat score because their body's dumping out toxins and it's being stored in blood, brain, bone, and fat. And it first goes to the fat, and then it will go to the bone, and then it will go to the brain. That's where the link is for inflammation and Alzheimer's, for instance. That's a venue for it, of how it gets there. And heavy metals don't need to have permission. If you even have a healthy gut, heavy metals go through it very easily. And heavy metals get stored out of, basically it goes to the liver and they store it in blood, brain, bone, and fat. So when you have an accumulation of those, there's really some simplistic ways to get rid of that, over a period of time. There's a supplement that you can take that will help protect you and, and relieve those heavy metals from your system. I know one product that is a very good product for that. And then you can, you've got to look at what your diet is, and and like what you're eating. So when you're looking at like, how do you make that, that idea simpler, is that, it's like if your body's like a Ferrari. And so if you change your gut, then you're changing your gut to a Chevy. And the Chevy can't support a Ferrari body, so it leaks, there's fumes, there's, and like food doesn't digest. Like when you look at your poo in the toilet, you should not see any food in your feces at all. And when you see it, it means you're not digesting that food. Stop eating it. It's just like if you like corn, for instance.
Stop eating it. Okay. Yeah. All right. That makes sense.
Because it's just, right now you're not eating that. But the question that you have to ask yourself is like, why? Because it's not really the diagnosis that you have. The question is like, why? Like, what is it in my lifestyle, my diet, my environment that's caused this problem in the first place? And so that's where chiseling back, each like section, because when your body, and they say that each fat cell in your body is like a little endocrine organ. And so when you're looking at like that fat regulation and metabolism and carbohydrate metabolism, issue, it's just like having that right ratio of those proteins, fats, and carbohydrates, which we talked about before, is really important so that you get the protein that you need so that you can have sustenance and sustain your body. And so it's, you're working with the system as opposed to against the system.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. That was really helpful. What is your feeling about the various, gut health tests that are out there now, like Viome and some others, where you basically give you a report back on what's happening and they give you some guidance on what kind of foods you should or shouldn't be eating based on the results. Is that something that you subscribe to, or do you have a different way of getting to whether what's happening in a person's gut?
Well, I think the first thing I do is I do my questionnaire, which is my first test. And then from there I can order specific tests. Do I order microbiome, some testing? I do. Do I order stool test? I do. But I would first start off with ordering a food sensitivity.
Yes. Okay.
And, so that what foods are aggravating you, because you can eat food and you're going, wow, that was such a great meal. And 3 days later, you're very brain fog city. And you're thinking, well, I didn't eat anything. I'm not, but you're having a reaction to food that you had 2 or 3 days before that. So you don't always have that, a quote unquote, anaphylactic type reaction to all the foods that you're eating. And so you can have sensitivity to foods and not know it. For instance, there's a case that I know of a woman who for 10 years was being treated by her GI doctor, and she kept on having bleeding in her stools, and they couldn't figure it out. So they finally said, like, you know what, we've tried everything. Drugs didn't work. Did this for a while, it worked. Excuse me, and did this and this and this. And so he said, our next option is to do surgery. And she said, what do you mean? She said, well, they're going to give her a bag. She had 4 kids and some of them were still little, and she said, well, can I play with my kids? No. Can I go swimming? No. And just like, so what can I do? And he said, well, you're going to have to alter your life. And so that wasn't acceptable to her. And she went and saw a colleague of mine who told me the story. And when she did that, they did this food test on her. And because no one ever asked her about the foods that she was eating, or took a look at that. And they found that she had one of the worst foods that she possibly put in her mouth was avocados. Every time she ate an avocado, she would have bleeding.
Oh, no kidding. And
when they took the avocado away, I mean, if you saw her colonoscopy, what her intestinal tract from the colonoscopy looked like, through the one, like the year before, then when she stopped seeing this guy and did this other program and got rid of foods that were really reactive for her, her gut healed in 1 year. Within 1 year, it was done. Guts heal very easily if you're given the right environment. So, it's just like, she didn't have to have surgery. She got to play with her kids. She got to go swimming, and the medical doctors was, their guess was wrong, for her. But it doesn't mean that what the medical doctor did was wrong, because he only knew and was doing what he was taught to do. Sometimes you got to think outside your box and ask the question, I would have been out of there way before 10 years, but you got to ask the question. It's just like, what else can I possibly do? Because there's always something you can do.
Sure.
What can I do to go from point A to point Z? And what's my best, easiest way to get there that makes sense? That's not going to cost me a ton of money. And, and I have the energy to do, because the problem for people in being consistent with something is the mindset, and the commitment to their own health. So when I work with somebody, I always ask, hey, how has your health been in the last 2 years? That's my question, like your question. And then I always say, are you willing to do whatever it takes to be healthy? And so, I can work, I have flexibility, and I can work with people, what people tell me what they want to do and how they want to do it. And so that's one of the things that when I'm bringing something to the table, I do really like what I practice common sense medicine. If I wouldn't do it, I would never tell someone to do it. And so it's got to make sense to me in order for me to say, this is a very cool thing, you should do this. So the microbiome thing, the last colonoscopy that I had, my gut's never been the same since then. And that was 2 years ago. And I'm still working on fixing my gut.
Really?
And so what they do when they're doing a colonoscopy, they're basically looking for cancer, and they're only looking for it in the large intestine and the rectum. They can only go to where the small intestine meets the large intestine. So I said, so why are you like flushing every good, bad, beautiful, and ugly thing out of the body? Because you have that whole part that especially in small intestines, and so, and this guy, and he said, well, after you do that, you're like, you can't ever really replace that, which I disagree with. And because you can take a look at what microbiomes are missing, and you can take what foods that you now might be sensitive to that you weren't sensitive to before, because whatever it was that handled that food no longer there, it's gone, so you've got to recreate the foundation. Like you got to move into a new house. It's like moving to a house and finding out that you have mold, black mold, you don't stay there, so it's like what happens is like they got rid of all that stuff, and now you got to go find a new house. So you have to rebuild your house, and you've got to start from scratch. You can't go and, you can't put the cart before the horse. You've got to go back to basics. So in any physician, anywhere, anytime, no matter chiropractor, acupuncturist, medical doctor of any profession or specialization in that, it's like when crap hits the fan, you got to go back to basics. So it's just like, and so it's just like I've been working on that one aspect, and I'm like 90% back to where I felt like I was at before, but there's just some foods that I used to eat and used to love to eat and had no problem eating them. I'm now allergic to cumin, now allergic to turmeric. I don't eat any beans at all. If I do, I have sharp stabbing pain, exactly where the acupuncture point is for the stomach. On a thing called the central vessel. And there's a point on there, and it's exactly at that point, and the things that relieve that are stuff like caraway. I'm going, there's something, and I still haven't figured out that one part of it, but it's a long process. It's taken me 2 years of working with somebody, and because I don't like to diagnose myself. And I look at somebody who's like, so tell me, and I'm the typical patient who like, so how do we do this quickly? And because that fast
right. Tell me the secret. Yeah.
And so it's been an interesting process. So when you ask that, that's, that was the first thing that, came to my mind. And it's just like and in my case, my colon didn't change in 12 years. I didn't do it in 10 years. I did a 12-year follow-up, and I doubt, personally from my belief system and for me, I doubt if I would ever do another colonoscopy, because I think a lot of times they set people up to have colon and stomach problems by doing this one procedure. I don't understand why they can't do a high colonic, since what they're looking at is just the colon to begin with, and leave the stuff that's already there alone, unless you have an upper GI problem, like when you have ulcers. And then you got to understand, like, well, why do you have ulcers in the first place? What's going on with the gallbladder? What's going on with the liver? Because the liver makes gallbladder dump bile into the stomach, which protects the lining of the stomach. So there's like, what's not happening in the function of the stomach. There's basically 4 different functions that happen in the stomach. So you've got to look at where the problem is at and fix the immediate problem, and targeted supplement that problem. And then you look at like, okay, so what's it look like now? And then you can see how your health chart changes. Because I've seen on my health chart, it's like a 8 by 10 piece of paper, and there's all these columns. And I still do it an old-fashioned way because I want my clients to draw out where their lines are, so they're connected to the chart, so they can see where their gut scores are at, liver scores, brain, musculoskeletal, male, female. You want to see where, and then you can like, well, how does this relate to each other? Because I've seen people who've had like 15 scores, like in high priorities, which is a bad issue for them. Like 2 months later, they only have 3. And so, and by changing lifestyle, by changing, the diet, their exercise, their sleep patterns, what their thoughts are, and, and making sure that they're structurally sound, so their function is working at 150%.
I'm glad you went through that, because it never occurred to me that with a colonoscopy, and I've only had one in my life, but that you basically you're just throwing away all of your, gut biome and starting over. It's like reseeding. I never thought about that, but yeah, you work a long time to get it right.
Yeah, and then it goes down the drain quickly, and then you're working at
Literally.
like there's a specific probiotic. There's a probiotic that I tell people, and a prebiotic that I tell people they need to take after a colonoscopy if they choose to have one, and that they need to take this probably for a year. I used to say just a couple months, but that's not what I'm finding anymore. And
oh, no kidding.
for somebody, I would never tell somebody, no, don't go do one, but what you want is just like, I don't have the family history of that, but I think sometimes when they, they change that flora, it's setting you up to have a problem later on. And, and I thought, I don't know, I'm still on the belief system that when you have your health, you have 1,000 dreams. And when you don't, you only have one,
Yeah, right. Sure.
and nobody wants to be that, people aren't kids and they go like, oh, when I grow up, I want to have, like, I want to have some chronic illness and disease. You kind of like don't think about those things. And when they do, you realize what a burden and how it's changed your life and how it's burdened other people who you love, so that there's this huge adjustment. And you got to go back like, well, why didn't I do self-care to begin with? Why didn't I put air in the tire? And because when you put, like when your tires are low, you keep on sometimes putting the air in it, and you find out a month later when it goes low again that you actually got a nail in it.
Yeah, right.
And Western medicine doesn't diagnose, generally speaking, unless you have the flat tire. So there's so many little questions, like in a system survey, the Swiss watch principle, that you can take a look at and say, and kind of catch things before they become a crisis. And to me, that has so much value to it, to be able to go like, hey, you know what? And I tell people to use my book on New Year's Day, and then because you don't have to think about what you want to do for your health, you spend 3 hours max, read the book or just do the questionnaire, find out what your chart looks like, and just say, this is where I need to focus my attention, so that they can get it handled, get it done, get on with their life, and then recheck in with the book about every like 4 or 6 months and see where they're at. So they can kind of like DIY it in a way, but with a little bit of supervision, and then figure out like, it's just like, where do I need to pay attention to? Or they can with the information that they get in the book, they can take it to their doctor if they're a functional medicine doctor, or understand functional medicine, lifestyle medicine, alternative medicine, and say like, hey, like, this is what I found in here. How come you're not addressing this? And it puts the power back into the patient or client's hands, so that they can get that. So, when I'm talking to people, if they're far away from me and they, don't want to work virtually, then what I will do is I will help them find somebody in their area. They might have to drive 2 hours in order to go find somebody who can like read that chart and that can really help them with their health, so that they can it can make a huge difference.
What is that probiotic that you mentioned? What?
It's by a professional company that I use. But you're looking at, in the probiotic part of it, it's just like, I wouldn't take a probiotic unless it has 30 billion live cultures in it. And so sometimes you have to titrate up to that, or you can't find it at 30. So you have to buy one that's 15. Like there's one that's at Whole Foods Market, which I don't remember the name of, but it has 7 or 8 strains in it. You want to have a variation because there's certain strains of bacteria in certain places of the gut. So some thought processes, because of the larger strain, it's just like by the time it gets to wherever it's got to go, it's not a live culture anymore, but I'm banking on, like, if you use a food chart and you put your foods together chemistry wise, and you're not drinking Coca-Cola, or having, using sugar, or eating a lot of breads, then you can fix your gut. When you fix your gut, your whole life changes. And your immune system becomes more sound by that. The Chinese always thought that, when you have your gut health, you can conquer anything. But so many people, when people tell me they have allergies, I said, you have a problem with your gut, right? And they're going, how do you know that? Because you can't have an allergy and not have a gut issue of some sort.
Well, the things that I'm seeing about gut health are, it's all the things you mentioned. And then people are talking about, even much further, being able to take gut health and actually cure chronic diseases, by improving, your gut. And, there's all this sort of research going on right now that I think, prior to recently, has just been completely ignored. Like, you get sick and we fix you, instead of here's how to not get sick.
Well, it's like, why? You got to ask, like, what's really going on. And when you say that, it's just like, you got to think about what you eat, the mindset you have when you eat. Do you bless your food? Are you grateful for your food? Or are you just shoving it in? I mean, we all do that, especially if you're driving someplace, and, but you can choose. I mean, I did a webinar and it was very cool. I talk about these kids very fondly. 17-year-old kids in junior achievement. And I gave a webinar to them, my very first webinar. I'm very old fashioned. And so doing that was, I was thinking, like, what slides should I put together? And I wanted to make sure that they were, for the teacher who was supporting this in the junior achievement in Florida that was supporting this, that the slides were appropriate for that age. I mean, because I had no clue. So, but I had so many wonderful questions. From that, and from dealing with them. And so they were very, like, some girls, well, oh, you mean I can just like go another mile and go to a sweet pea where they have salads and all fresh foods together? I said, yes, just don't eat any fruit with it. Oh, can you do that? And then I would have another question, and another question. It was really cool. I really loved it.
Well, congratulations on your first webinar. And
Thanks.
getting kids early, right, to start understanding.
Well, the cool part of it too was, in that scenario, is out of, like, I think 15 kids were in there, like 6 or 7 of them bought my book.
Oh, nice.
And I just said, like, oh, I go, that was just, that was very sweet. Like, and when someone buys my book, I also give them an opportunity to chat with me about what the results are, so they know what their next best step is. Because sometimes you look at that and think, like, okay, I don't want you to get overwhelmed. Knowledge is power, but it's only powerful if you know where to stack it and which direction you got to go in.
Right. So I feel like we've talked a lot about your book without talking about your book in particular, which is Why Are You Sick, Fat, and Tired, which is a great name for a book, by the way.
Thank you.
Gets your attention. So I'd actually, I don't know, maybe we could do another one of these and we could talk sort of more directly about that, because I'm kind of interested in it. I would want to go through it first and then go do it. Maybe if you're up for that later,
yeah,
we could do that. But Where do you want people to connect with you, Pat? I mean, I mentioned at the beginning that I connected with you on LinkedIn. I know you're on all the socials, but what do you prefer? And
not all
okay.
of them, but
no one's on all of them, I guess. But yes, okay.
I have. I know people who are. I am on LinkedIn, so people can find. If you're on LinkedIn, people can find me on LinkedIn. That's one of my best places that I always send people to.
Okay.
I have a Facebook page, but I would tell you your better bet is to go to my website, which is called healthteamnetwork.com. And I have an Instagram account, but my two favorite places are my website and primarily LinkedIn, if you have a LinkedIn account. And then there's inside the book, in the back of the book, if somebody wants to get the book, on page 102 are all my contacts for my website, my email, Ask Dr. Pat at Health Team Network, and my calendar. Because I ask people who have done the book, I give them an opportunity to spend 30 minutes with me and look at what their results are. And that's no charge, no obligation. I just want you to be healthier. And if you're healthier, it makes it a better place for everybody else.
Well, Dr. Pat, I'm so thankful for having you on the show today. I definitely encourage everyone to take her up on her offer, connect with Pat and talk with her. I mean, you've heard, we walk through a lot of fantastic stuff that's really meaningful for you. And taking control, being your own advocate, understanding what matters to you with your health is something I have learned later in life, but I am so convinced that that's the right thing for people to be doing, and it's possible. You can do it. Mm-hmm. I just want to close with one thing you said, which I thought it was awesome. I don't know if you came out with this or whatever, but I'll attribute it to you now.
Thank you.
You said that when you have your health, you have 1,000 dreams. And when you're sick, you only have one. And that's something to take away. So Pat, thank you so much for that. It's been an honor and a pleasure to have you on the show today.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. And just think it's all started with that drive to Detroit to go before I said I didn't want to go to college. Nice.
Yeah. So
funny?
For parents out there, show the kids what the future could look like, because they may not know what it looks like where they are right now. They may just think that they do.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you so much, Mike. I really appreciated this. This has really been wonderful.
It's been my pleasure. Thanks for listening to this episode of the How Did Happen podcast, where we believe that success doesn't happen unless you make it happen. You can subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, or wherever you like to listen. And while you're there, please rate it and leave a comment as well. I'd love to hear your thoughts about the show, ideas for future guests, or whatever you'd like to share. And of course, you can always find me at MikeMalatesta.com. See you next time. Thanks again for listening to the How Did Happen podcast.